Hi, so we just finished watching Nayak or The Hero, Satyajit Ray's take on the film industry, celebrity stardom. And it features in the starring role probably the biggest, not probably, definitely the biggest star ever of Bengali screen. He passed away 1981, pretty early. 80. So it's about 53, 54 years old only. This film was shot when Uttam Kumar, that's his name, sorry, Uttam Kumar Chattopadhyay, he was only 40 years old at that point, but he had a 12-year career behind him. And of them, the films that he had made with this heroine, Suchitra Sen, they remain the legend of Bengali cinema to this day. And they're probably the most loved films. Then they kind of stopped making movies for a while together, partly because Suchitra Sen retired and did other things, which kind of freed up Uttam Kumar, because while he was making these films with Suchitra Sen, they were of a very specific kind. They were always like romantic melodramas, or maybe sometimes romantic comedy. And because of their coupledom across about 20 films, I think altogether, maybe a little more, I forget, they came to be known as this sort of, not just, they were never really involved in personal life, not in the usual sense, but they came to be sort of thought of as this conjugal couple almost, mythic, legendary. So this is, of course, Suchitra Sen is not in this film, but I wanted to mention her because much of his attraction, allure, comes from those films that he did with her. I think, Trinankur, I want you to say a little bit more about Uttam Kumar, because that's where we need to start today.
Yeah, I want to kind of cite Ray here, because I'm quite less eloquent than Ray, for sure. So this is his first impression of Uttam Kumar and his writing. Ray is writing, of course. I saw 3 of Uttam's films, all in a row, made by one of our ablest directors, Nirmal De. 2 of them were comedies, mind you. First impressions were certainly good. Uttam had good looks, a certain presence, and ease of manner, and this is very important. No trace of the theatre in his performance. He also, obviously, had a future, and what a future he had. But keep this in mind that Ray starts his journey with Soumitra Chatterjee in 1957, 1959, with World of Opu. But even before that, he actually had a plan to make a film with Uttam Kumar called The Home and the World. And irony is that film will eventually get made after Uttam Kumar's death. And Uttam Kumar refused the role on the basis that he was offered a negative role in the film. So he was at the height of his stardom in 1956. So clearly Ray had Uttam Kumar in his mind, and Ray was this, there is this myth that Ray was opposed to the star. He was not at all opposed to the star. He was really interested in Uttam Kumar, and Uttam Kumar plays the more cerebral detective in Ray's oeuvre. That's the film called Zoo, where there is this detective called Byomkesh Bakshi that's played by Uttam Kumar 3 years after this film. So clearly, 2 years, 1968. So clearly, Uttam Kumar is not just a star, he is Ray is quite invested in Uttam Kumar as an actor also, and you can see this in this film.
So Ray was in the habit of sometimes he would write a script that would be meant for one person, and if he didn't get that person to act in that role, he would not even make the film. So one can think of Chobi Bishwas, Jalsa Ghar, or The Music Room, but his first original script from a story that he thought of was Kanchenjunga, which was a brilliant film. I would have shown that, but there's no good copy. And then this one. So I was also thinking, of the moment in Uttam's career, like that's the year Shankho Bela comes out, and the next year Anthony Ferengi come out. Like these are huge blockbusters. So he's one of the, as I keep saying, I'm kind of repeating myself, but he is really something like it's like Elvis plus Cary Grant plus Tom Cruise all rolled into one, if you can imagine that. So I also thinking that's the Bengali film industry context, and clearly it's a very much a film about the Bengali film industry. And Ray has this sort of investment in looking at the backstories, and that's what he's doing here, right? He wrote a short story called Potal Babu Film Star, which is really about this guy, this sort of clerical nobody who suddenly by chance gets to be an extra on a film set. And I think he butts his head by accident and says, ooh, and that was the role. But so, this is about extras. Here, of course, it's the above the line superstar that is being interrogated, that kind of position. So that's the context of Bengal. Do you want to say a little bit about the international scene? Just remind us.
Yeah, I mean, the two obvious references are Fellini, especially the use of wind in the dream sequence. That's obvious Fellini. And the other is, of course, Ingmar Bergman. So Wild Strawberries or Samuel Strollett. That's being referred here in the dream sequence, in the all these skeletons and everything. But I really spotted this only this time, and this is the magic of the big screen. You spot things that you didn't before. The Sharmila Tagore character, the modern woman character, so-called, she is clearly based on Anouk Aimee in 8½.
Yeah.
That's absolutely modeled on Anouk Aimee. So if you carefully watch Anouk Aimee's mannerisms and characterization in 8½, and rewatch this film, you will see that it's clearly the glasses and the mannerism, the way she folds her hands, all of that is clearly modeled on that. So these are the two clear references, and Bishnupriya pointed this out, that Ray actually gave the David O. Selznick Prize to Bergman in 1963 for Winterlight. So clearly they were having a conversation somewhere. Yeah. That is evident. And Persona also comes out in 1966. So something is happening here.
So, and Persona is for those of you who have seen it, you will know it's an intensely sort of, how to put it, it's about the psyche, right? And splits in the psyche. And here she actually talks about Sharmila Tagore's character. What's her name? Rita? No. What's her name? Aditi, right. She talks about the subconscious or the unconscious and repression and this kind of Freudian models, and that's where the dreams come from. Condensation, displacement, I was just waiting for, but they didn't mention. But so there's clearly a moment, and this is a little different for Ray because you don't see that many dream sequences in his films. The psychological is less important to him than probably the parapsychological, which is also here a little bit with the willpower and the will force and
reincarnation.
Stuff. Reincarnation, of course. There's a whole chatter about reincarnation. So, Bishnu. Clearly, this is a film about stardom. It's about an icon, popular icon. It's about celebrity culture, pre-internet, if you know what that means. So, if you want to talk a little bit about this relationship of these three terms, like what is an icon, what is a art, they're usually used interchangeably often.
Yeah. Clearly, I mean, we start with, the back of Uttam Kumar's head when he's looking in the mirror. So obviously, we're very, in the middle of the film, we're told, you don't get the immediacy of the theater audience, for the film star. So that the mirror becomes clearly a kind of technology about the mediated presence that the star gets, but also it's where the image is composed. So going to Bhaskar's and Trinankur's point about the staging of psychoanalysis. And in that first sequence, we get 2 bits of information about him, highly mediated. One, he's going to Delhi to get an award. And the second is sort of celebrity culture. You know what Tom Cruise has for breakfast. So there's sort of the banal life, the gossipy life of the film star as highly ordinary. So that's on the celebrity side of the spectrum. And then the other side is the icon, who is always the object of adoration and veneration. So that it's in a higher pedestal, carries a cultural field, embodies a cultural field. And the star is somewhere in between. And right in the first sequence, the star is actually placed as an exemplary figure and a kind of a really ordinary figure, just like us in some ways. So the star idea for Ray is it's a large social phenomenon, of course, through the public sphere, but it's also deeply intersubjective, right? So he sees himself, and you constantly hear about the fact that this ideal image that he's put together, and you see him dressing in the first sequence, is very fragile. The flop is always coming. It's just around the corner. It's kind of virtual in this film. And so there's a part of it, and of course later on that mirror sequence is repeated in the train bathroom, you know, which is a very much Persona reference, where the cracked, you know, mirror. So that's the star part, but I think there are no stars, as we are told, without the fans. And I think this is the most, complicated elaboration of the fan as a spectrum. You have the adoring young girl who looks at him. He's quite tender towards her. You know, right from there up to the critic, the educated woman who has nothing to do with, you know, the popular movies. It's very much about the popular, you know. But she also has to learn to be a responsible fan. So there's a spectrum of women characters in the film that are placed to think about fandom itself as not just hordes of people rushing at you and garlanding you, but a different set of quite complicated attachments to the star. So I'll just say I think a film is really about the star-fan nexus in many ways, yeah.
So Uttam Kumar is often referred to as two things. Mahanayak, which means the great hero. That's the more respectful way of referring to him. The other is guru. Now you all understand what guru is, right? Like someone who teaches. But here guru is a very intimate kind of colloquial term that is used to address someone that you are enthralled with, but you also want to be close to them. You don't think of them as someone terribly removed from you. And who you model your mannerisms and life after, maybe. And so, you know, he was a guru to many, many hundreds of thousands of young men, but also women. They were crazy about him. And, you know, I was thinking about the kind of fanaticism of the fan. Like you see this kind of, the crowd outside, they're clawing almost, right? It's about desire. It's about the desire to be like Uttam Kumar, but it's also a desire for him. It's complicated, that kind of libidinal investments. And the guru thing is very much about being on this, imagining yourself to be on the same plane as him. Whereas the Mahanayak is sort of putting him on a pedestal. So there's a sort of relationships that people have when they address the star that by these separated, but these distinct terms. We have to talk about Sharmila Tagore too, because many of you have seen her before this in the world of Oppu. That's her debut around the age of 15. The shooting is happening when she is 14, 15. She's still not left high school. And then she goes on to be in The Goddess, Devi, which is an incredible film, and she has mesmerizing turn. And then she sort of veers away from Ray for a while and ends up in Bombay. By the time this film has been made, she too is a superstar, not just regionally, not just within the Bengali film industry, but nationally. And her huge breakthrough film in Bombay is Kashmir Ki Kali, 1964, I think. Yeah? And so this is 66, so it's soon after. What is really funny is when this shooting is happening, she is dating one of the most important people of that period in India, the cricket team's captain, Mansur Ali Khan Pataudi, who comes from a royal family. And there, the whole thing was a legend of, you know, the era. And apparently he used to come on the sets and hang out with them all the time because they're just dating then. And then they got married. And Many of you probably also know that their son and daughter are now such stars too. Anyway, but Sharmila is shooting at this point a little film called Aradhana, which will become maybe the biggest box office hit until then. In '65, she was in a film, small role, but in a big film called Walked, which broke all box office records in '65, like surpassing all other films. So clearly she has arrived on the scene. Aradhana was huge. Then she goes on to make Amar Prem with the same director. In between, she does Evening in Paris, I think with the same director, Shakti Samanta, Bengali guy, but worked in Bombay. And Samanta was really pissed with Sharmila on several occasions because in the middle of shooting, if Satyajit Ray's phone call came, she would give him a huge block of dates, like 45 days. So everything else gets stalled, right? And he would grumble, oh, God called. So you have to go. So there's this kind of, very interesting dynamic between the Hindi film industry in Bombay and the Bengali film industry. And Satyajit Ray was clearly sort of, remember this is also the period when in the West, all of Indian cinema is equated to just Satyajit Ray, like nothing else is important. Because this is coming out of the film festival circuit. So there was a lot of animosity towards him from Bombay, for good reasons, I think. They were doing great work. I want to talk a little bit about, just mention this, An Evening in Paris. Look up on YouTube, you have the songs, just put in An Evening in Paris, film songs. And there's one where Sharmila is in a one-piece swimming suit, doing water skiing. It is just the most risky thing you can think of. And the hero is dangling from a helicopter above, trying to woo her. This is like classic Bollywood going big, going to Japan or Paris and doing these massive budget films and trying to kind of, make it really big globally. The media. There are at least two media forms, sectors that are important here. Who wants to talk about that a bit?
There are many media forms. Well, can we stay with Sharmila for a minute? I'm just breaking code now. But I just wanted to say, in this series that we've shown the question of, the absence of women in some of the popular genre films have come up. And this is a film where the women characters, to go to Bhaskar's point about the film star, who's the object of desire, funny, sexy, elegant, and he knows it, right? He performs it. He knows he's the object of desire. But the women who are entering the workforce also sort of negotiate. And it's interesting how the Sharmila character figure, we're told she's immediately sexualized by him. She tucks her pen into her sari blouse. I mean, we're told explicitly, despite when she takes off her glasses, she's beautiful, etc., etc. So these are sort of very fine touches about the new woman, the city woman, the urban woman, negotiating a place, sometimes by using desire, and using their position in a particular way. So I think it's a very complex sort of feminist take on what happens to all this duplicitous sort of sexual normativity that's imposed on women while they are clearly sexual objects as well in these films. And I think the culture, the magazine culture is related to that.
And I think if I may just add something to that, the students in my class know this by now, too much, they have heard about this, but Ray actually very systematically analyzes the role and position of women within Indian nationalism, within Indian society after independence. So there is a series of films starting with Devi, and then Charulata, and then Home and the World, that are dealing with women just coming out into the open from the inner part of the mansion, just coming out in front of other men, in fact. And that's a revolution, right? In the 1890s, 80s, or 1905, that's huge. And of course, Sharmila is part of one of those films, Devi. And then he makes a series of films Oh, okay. These people, these women that I just mentioned, those characters are referred to as Nobina, or the modern woman. And then you have a series of films where you have sort of the city woman who's going out to work. It's not just enough to come out of in front of other men, not just your husband, but they're going to work. They're joining the workforce, they're in the public spaces, they're on their own. So it starts with probably the big city, Mahanagar. And then there are a series of films. Sharmila is actually in a lot of them, like this one, but Days and Nights in the Forest, where the hero is trying to be very charming and have control of the situation, but she again and again turns the tables on her in a very kind of Chekhovian game. And then Shima Baddho, The Company Limited, all those films. So through those, you start to see another kind of woman character coming up, which Vishnu and I have called the Adhunika, meaning that not just the modern woman, but the contemporary woman, the person who has joined the workforce, earns a living, and is more or less free. I mean, yeah. So Trinankur, yeah.
Yeah, going back to Uttam Kumar now. So, and then segueing into the print media. So there are two observations that I would like to make which are relevant here. So we are talking about the fans, and you see there are two moments where the star is not recognized. One when he gets down for a cup of tea, and it's in a nondescript village, and you see that is not part of the star's public because nobody recognizes him. One. The second is there is a Hindi-speaking woman who does not recognize him, and of course the kid also doesn't recognize him, the girl. And it shows that he's a regional star. So there is a clear demarcation of where the star's publics are. It's a very urban and suburban, because you see Bardwan, which is a suburban town, and then there is Calcutta, which is of course very urban, it's a city. So there is a clear demarcation of the star's publics, that's one. The other thing is this whole discussion of the flop hit box office. We must remember that Uttam Kumar, before he became this phenomenon, let's say, he was known as a flop master, because not 3 films, but 6 films back-to-back flopped for him. And then he went back to his job and contemplated whether he should join the industry, and then he worked hard and got back. And then the rest is history, as they say. And in this moment of history, there is one magazine that this woman reads called Ultarath. Ultarath is a celebration, it's a festival in Bengali. And the magazine is a bi-weekly magazine, so it comes out bi-weekly. And this particular magazine is more or less the emblematic, you can say the emblematic film magazine of the 1950s. Because this kind of catapults Uttam Kumar's star persona. It would devote numbers of issues, and I have worked on this magazine throughout the 50s. There are numbers of issues devoted singularly to Uttam Kumar, just for Uttam Kumar, like series of photographs and whatnot. You can write a dissertation on this. Maybe not in US, but definitely.
This is a star machine at work.
Absolutely. So this magazine that this woman reads, the Bengali magazine, that's a star machine for Uttam Kumar. So there are many intertextualities happening here.
And Molly is reading
Yes.
an in English language women's
Magazine.
big magazine, which,
Yes.
Femina, the big Indian magazine, starts in 1959. So there's a whole lot of print culture, magazine culture.
Different kinds of reading publics are emerging here. That's one. The other thing that I want to mention is that most of the actors you see here come from the theater. And there is a huge debate going on around this time, let's say in the early 1950s, whether the acting that, let's say the theatrical acting that has a long tradition in Bengal, that should be promoted, or there should be naturalist acting. And one of the key figures in this debate is this figure called Shishir Kumar Bhaduri, who is known as the emperor of drama, or Nata Samrat. So he is the one who would propose that film acting is lesser, theater acting is greater, this kind of equation, and that is clearly dramatized in this film. But not just that, there is something else. There was a distinct kind of acting tradition before independence, before Uttam Kumar arrived on scene, which is kind of modeled on these two big figures, Durgadas Banerjee and P.C. Bodua. Let's not get into the names, but importantly, they were very theatrical. And Ray said this is the weakness of Bengali cinema, that it has technical sophistication, but it does not know how to naturalize acting. And this is where Uttam Kumar arrives and changes the game for Bengali cinema. And 60s, mind you, is the pinnacle of Bengali cinema, because not only is it's financially stable, but also not just Ray, but also other filmmakers. Films are going in Venice, in Berlin, winning awards and doing wonderful things. So it's a marvelous thing for a regional cinema. So I wanted to point that out too.
So let's see, where can we go? This is again, this film is sort of limited on purpose. It's on a train, and there are certain kinds of limitations, and within that, so it's a kind of a very strict and economical script, right? So within that, one has to think about what is it about a train journey like this that makes him open up more? What is it about this break from humdrum life? Everybody seems to act a little differently from how they would otherwise. Who wants to take that?
Well, I think we both have things to say. I'll just say the more form or genre-oriented one. Satyajit Ray, in 3 of his films, at least, if not more, Kanchenjunga, which you heard about in 1962. Yeah. So upper middle class family goes for a holiday to a hill station, and so they're in hiatus from their humdrum ordinary life. And in their conversations and in their interactions, in their encounters with other people, which is very important, there's a kind of a pastoral mode. Like you go away somewhere else on a holiday in order to rediscover the norms that are not really available to you in the busyness and bustle of your everyday world. And again he returns to this. So Kanchenjunga 1962, this one is 1966, and then 1970 he makes, I think Bhaskar already mentioned, Days and Nights in the Forest, or Din Ratri, which is even more dystopian. They actually go to Bihar and to the forest, and things happen there that are really quite difficult. And there, I think the sexual norms are at the center, right? So this idea of taking a break as a reflective space where you can reflect on your, persona here, of course. But also, I think, for Aditi, she also tears up her writing. It's a reflective place of writing, but what she learns is what is it to be a responsible critic who takes responsibility for the star. And if you notice, one of the people he travels with in the compartment also puts his foot up on the
She becomes maternal
She
suddenly.
becomes maternal and realizes, he needs care. The star is also in your care, in the public's care. And that's a point that's made because they're in this strange hiatus situation. So I think of these as a kind of the pastoral form that Ray takes up, and that has a long history in Bengali literature also, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the curious thing about the train is it's a sleight of hand in terms of the script, because stars by then would always travel by flight. So it's an intentional inclusion or intentional insertion, one could say. And the use of the train as a semi-private space is very, very important. That at every moment, this space is very porous, and you don't know what kind of encounters will happen. That's the beauty of the train. You know the set of people, but you don't know the nature of the encounter. And the train space is particularly in the case of Uttam and Sharmila. This is a very interesting design that must be noted. When Uttam is interrogating Sharmila, Uttam is on the left of the frame, Sharmila is on the right. And then their position is reversed. When Uttam is the one who is narrating his dreams and his failures and his aspirations, and Sharmila is on the chair of the analyst, let's say. So there is a clear inversion going on there.
So, of course, these are very well-to-do people, because most Indians don't get to travel like that in a train. It's just first class, air-conditioned, but probably luxury car with the very fancy dining vegetable, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so, and Vishnu, Kanchenjunga, that family cannot be called middle class or upper, can't be. They're really rich.
Okay, they're really rich. And I think here has a more spectrum of class.
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, the one that shares a space with him, they are very rich because he's the industrialist.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. I was thinking also about, authorship. I mean, this is the last event we are doing on Ray. All this was to mark his centenary, which came and went last year. We couldn't do it, but we've done it now. And the whole idea behind these 4 films was that we wanted to see stuff that are not usually shown in North America. And the other 3, of course, have a clear trajectory. They're more children's films or young adult films in the popular genre, 2 of the biggest films that he ever made in terms of box office. This one is about pop culture, right? The popular commercial film industry and celebrity and all that. That's the pop cultural arena. But I was specifically thinking about if we have to think of Ray as an auteur, like what is his authorship? Who's an author in this film, for instance? Now it's easier because there's no story that he borrows from. It's his own story. The script is his own idea. So he's clearly the author. But then, if he would not make the film if Uttam Kumar didn't agree to come on. He would just drop it. That is interesting because that means he's clearly saying he's a co-author. Without him, there's no film, right? It's the way he moves through space, it's the way he acts, the way he smiles, the way he looks at other characters. All of that, the kind of allure of Uttam Kumar, enigma of Uttam Kumar, that is absolutely crucial to co-writing the film itself. It's being written through his performance. So it's not, Sharmila Tagore actually says this in one of her reminiscences that he was a control freak, totally. That's why he stops using other musicians. He composes music. By the middle of his career, he's pretty much operating the camera too. He's often cited as a co-editor. So, he does all of that because he's a control freak. But he makes an exception for a few people. Chobi Biswas, the guy who was in The Goddess or The Music Room, towering figure, and I think there's a kind of reference to him also, that kind of overwhelming persona. And Ray let him be who he was because he was using that persona. And then this one is also another film. But there's another film later on that he wanted to make with maybe Uttam Kumar, but more crucially this woman. It's about a cabaret on Park Street where all the bars and nightclubs are in Calcutta. And it was going to be, it was written by somebody else, a novel called Hotel Snow Fox. And things happened and the actress that he had wanted to use refused to work with him. That's another story. But he just dropped the whole project. He wouldn't do it. So he really depended on the perfect casting. And here I wanted to kind of bring up Bijoya Roy, who I don't think I've even talked about in class yet, but she was the wife. They were first cousins who fell in love and got married and created a scandal. It was only because they were part of the Brahmo Samaj, which was a sort of reformist, very erudite and progressive sect, that they were able to have a life. But because he was so brilliant, and she was quite impressive. And some of the most interesting breakthrough artists that Ray worked with, she actually found them. So I kind of wanted to bring her up at this point because she has to be thought of as a co-author too. Ray the auteur would not work without Bijoya Roy also, who always works in the background, but nevertheless her presence is felt.
Can I add something? Yeah, Bijoya Roy is not just, I mean, she's there in the background, but she's also an expert of classical music. She's also and folk music too. So Ray used to consult all the time whenever he wanted to use a folk music or Indian classical in his films. Especially the folk music that you hear in The Goddess, that particular folk song that you hear, that Ray wrote and of course borrows the Ramprasadi tune from another song, that he ran through Bijoya Roy, and she's the one who approved the song and said that, okay, you can use it, it goes well, you are good to go. Yeah. So she had a lot of say on Ray's use of music. So there is a collaboration going on silently at the domestic level.
I mean, it's an auteur complex
Yeah.
with Vijaya Roy. And there is a very well-known literary magazine called Desh, in which she publishes their life together, in which
Which I think has been translated. Our story.
Our story, which again is part of this print culture and public sphere, and people know her as a co-signatory of sorts to these films. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.